I don't work night shifts anymore. That's the short version. The long version is what I'm about to tell you, and I want to be clear about something before I do. I'm not someone who dramatizes things. I'm not telling this story for attention. I'm telling it because I still think about it almost every day. And I think people who work alone at night deserve to know that what happened to me can happen to them too. I worked the overnight shift at a small gas station and convenience store off a state highway. It was the kind of place that barely had a reason to stay open past midnight, but it did anyway. A couple of truckers here and there. The occasional insomniac, grabbing energy drinks. Maybe someone passing through on a long drive who needed to top off their tank. That was about it. Most of my shift was spent restocking shelves, wiping down the coffee station, and staring at my phone. The night this happened, it was just past 2:30 in the morning. I had already finished most of the restocking. I was standing behind the counter doing absolutely nothing, which was normal. I stepped outside for a minute, just to get some air. It was cold out, late enough in the year that my breath showed. The parking lot was empty. The highway was quiet. Just the hum of the pumps and the flicker of the overhead lights casting everything in that flat white glow. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, rubbing my hands together, looking at nothing in particular. That's when I noticed him. He was standing behind pump 3, not at the pump, not using it, just standing behind it, partially in the shadow, with both hands in the front pocket of a dark red hoodie. The hood was up. There was no car anywhere near him. My first thought was that he was waiting for someone, a ride maybe. People did that sometimes, though usually they came inside and waited, or at least stood somewhere more visible, not half hidden behind a pump in the dark. I watched him for a second. He wasn't moving much, just shifting his weight slightly, and he was facing the store. I went back inside. I told myself it was nothing, but I kept watching him through the glass. He stayed in that same spot, not moving toward the store, not moving toward the road, just standing there. After a few minutes, he started doing this thing that I can only describe as pacing in a tight circle, not like he was restless or cold. It was more deliberate than that, like he was working himself up to something. Then he started walking toward the door. He pushed inside and came up to the counter without stopping to look at anything. He didn't grab a drink or glance at the snacks. He just walked straight to me, and when he got there, he didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me. Sizing me up is the only way I can put it. Then he started talking. His words came out rushed, almost rehearsed. He said his car had broken down just before the highway entrance. Said he needed a jump, or maybe just a little gas to get to the next town. Maybe I could come take a look, help him figure out what was wrong. I remember thinking how off it sounded. Not just the words, but the way he said them. There was no frustration in his voice, no tiredness, none of the things you'd expect from someone who'd just had their car die on them in the middle of the night. It was flat, recited. I told him I could call a tow truck. He shook his head immediately. Too fast. No, he said. He just needed a flashlight. Maybe someone to help him check under the hood. It would only take a minute. I said I'd see what I could do and turned toward the back counter like I was looking for something. What I was actually doing was buying time to think. And while I was standing there, I glanced at the security monitor on the shelf behind me. There was a car parked just beyond the highway entrance, right where he said it would be. For a second, I second-guessed myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he really did need help, and I was being paranoid. The car was right there. But then I remembered. I had been outside less than 10 minutes ago. I had looked at that exact stretch of road. There was no car there when I stepped out. I kept my eyes on the monitor. And then I saw it. The tiniest movement near the back bumper. Someone shifting position behind the car, crouching just low enough to stay out of full view. Everything in my body went cold. I turned back to the man slowly. I smiled and told him I thought I had a flashlight in the back office and that I'd grab it. He nodded. Some of the stiffness in his shoulders dropped slightly, like he was relieved. I walked toward the back room at a normal pace. The second I was out of his direct sight line, I moved fast and hit the emergency panic button mounted under the back counter. The alarm screamed through the whole building. I braced myself. I honestly expected him to come at me. He didn't. What happened instead was worse in a way I didn't expect. I came back around the corner and looked at him, and the nervous energy was just gone. All of it. The shifting, the rehearsed words, the tension in his face. It drained out of him like it had never been there. He just stood there completely still, and then slowly he smiled. Not a panicked smile, not embarrassed. It was calm, almost like he found the whole thing mildly interesting. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the door. I ran to the monitor and watched him go. He and the other man didn't go back to the car. They crossed the lot and went straight into the tree line behind the station and disappeared. The car just sat there, engine off, lights off, empty looking. By the time the police arrived, the two men were gone. No sign of them in the woods, no footprints they could follow in the dark. The car sat at the highway entrance exactly where I'd seen it on the monitor. The officers ran the plates. The car had been reported stolen 8 days earlier, over 100 miles away. They had it towed the next morning. That's when they found what was in the trunk. Rope, the thick kind, already cut into lengths. Zip ties, a few of them. And a roll of duct tape. Nothing else. No one inside. Just those things, sitting there together like they'd been packed deliberately. The detective I spoke to the following day was careful with his words, but the implication was obvious. Those things weren't there by accident. Someone had put them there for a reason, and that reason had something to do with why those men were at my gas station at 2:30 in the morning, trying to get me to walk outside alone. The case is technically still open. No one was ever identified. No one was ever caught. I quit a few days after it happened. I told my manager I was done with nights, and when he pushed back, I told him what was in that trunk. He didn't push back after that. I think about a few things when I replay it. I think about how clean the whole setup was. The broken down car story, the second person hiding behind it, the way he stood outside in the dark long enough that I'd already seen him before he came in, like he wanted to give me time to get comfortable with his presence before he made his move, like that was part of it. I think about the smile he gave me when the alarm went off, how relaxed it was. It didn't feel like the smile of someone who'd just had a plan fall apart. It felt like the smile of someone who was already thinking about the next time. And I think about the rope in that trunk, already cut, already measured. Someone did that beforehand. Someone sat somewhere, cut that rope into pieces, packed it neatly, and drove it out to a gas station off a quiet highway in the middle of the night. I was supposed to go outside with him. I don't let myself think too long about what happens in the version of that night where I did. I've worked night shifts for almost 3 years now. First at a Target, then a grocery store, and for the past year and a half, at a Walmart supercenter off Route 9. I've seen drunk guys get into fistfights over parking spots. I've had people try to walk out with flat screens under their coats. I once found a man asleep in a lawn chair in the garden section at 4 in the morning. None of it shook me. It was just part of the job. What happened about 2 months ago was different. I work the overnight stalking shift, which runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most of the time it's me and maybe 5 or 6 other people scattered across the floor. It's quiet in a way that takes some getting used to. The store is massive, so even with a handful of coworkers, you can go a long time without seeing anyone. Just you, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and whatever aisle you're working. I was in the home goods section around 2 a.m., breaking down boxes and restocking shelf paper, when I noticed her for the first time. She was an older woman, late 50s, maybe 60. She had silver hair pulled back loosely and was wearing a long beige coat, which I thought was a little odd for the middle of August, but I didn't think too much of it. She was pushing one of those large, flat carts, the kind people use for big items, the kind that's hard to maneuver through narrow aisles. What caught my eye was that the cart was completely empty. She was just walking, slowly, not looking at shelves, not picking anything up, not checking her phone, just moving through the section with her hands on the cart. I watched her for a second, then went back to what I was doing. Customers sometimes wander. Sometimes they're killing time, waiting for a prescription or waiting for someone else in the store. I've seen it 100 times. But about 15 minutes later, she came back through. Same pace, same empty cart, same direction. I looked up as she passed and tried to make eye contact, the way you do when you're ready to ask if someone needs help. She didn't look at me. She just kept moving, eyes sort of fixed forward, like she was looking at something just past whatever was in front of her. I went back to stalking. Then she came back a third time. At that point, I set down the shelf paper and just watched her. She made the same loop, down the main aisle, past the bedding, past the storage bins, and then around the corner out of my sight. Same cart, still empty. I pulled out my radio to call one of my co-workers and ask if they'd seen her. The radio crackled, but nobody answered. That happened sometimes when people were on break or in the back. I didn't think too hard about it. I moved on to the next aisle. A little while later, I was crouched down at the bottom shelf in the cleaning supplies section when I heard the cartwheels again. That slow, even roll. I stood up, and she was right there in the aisle with me, maybe 20 feet away, moving in my direction. I gave her a smile and asked if she was looking for anything specific. She stopped. She looked at me for the first time. Her expression didn't change. She just looked at me the way you might look at a road sign, taking in information. Then she shook her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, and kept pushing the cart past me. I stood there for a second. I don't know what it was. The way she looked at me, or more accurately, the way she looked through me. There was nothing hostile in it. No irritation, no acknowledgement really. It was just blank in a way that didn't sit right. I texted one of my co-workers, a guy named Marcus who was working the food aisles on the other side of the store. I said, "Hey, have you seen a woman with a flat cart, silver hair, beige coat?" He replied maybe 2 minutes later. "Yeah, she came through here like an hour ago. Just walking around. Figured she was waiting for someone." So she'd been doing this for at least an hour before I even noticed her. I started paying more attention after that. Every time I moved to a new section, she would eventually appear. Not immediately. Not like she was following me step for step. But within 10 or 15 minutes, she'd come through. The same walk. The same empty cart. At around 3:30, I went to take my break in the back. I was sitting in the break room with another co-worker, a woman named Diane, who'd been there for years. I described the woman to her, and Diane frowned and said, "She was in the back of electronics when I came through, just standing at the end of the aisle." Standing, not pushing the cart anymore, just standing. I don't know why that detail bothered me more than the rest of it, but it did. When I came back out after break, I didn't see her for a while. I started to think maybe she'd finally left. Maybe whoever she was waiting for had shown up, or she'd just decided to go. I let myself relax a little. Then, around 4:15, I was finishing up the last section I needed to stock. A corner of the housewares aisle near the back of the store, close to the emergency exit. It's one of the more isolated spots. No cameras back there, and it's far enough from the main floor that you can't hear the ambient noise from the front of the store. I was kneeling on the floor, cutting open a box when I heard the cart. I looked up, and she was there at the entrance to the aisle. just standing still, both hands on the cart, looking at me. I stood up. She didn't move. I asked her again if she needed help finding something. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, in a completely flat voice, "She gets off at 6. I stared at her. "I'm sorry?" "She gets off at 6, she repeated. Same tone, same face. My shift ended at 6 a.m. I felt cold. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked toward the front of the store. Not running, but fast. I found Marcus in the cereal aisle and told him what she said. He looked at me and then looked over my shoulder and said, "She's right there." I turned around. She had followed me. She was at the end of the aisle, still with the cart, just watching us. Marcus called the manager on duty, a guy named Phil who came out from the back office. By the time Phil got to us, she was gone. We did a walk of the store and couldn't find her. Her cart was sitting abandoned in the middle of the kitchenware section, still empty. Phil walked the parking lot and said he didn't see anyone matching her description. There were only a handful of cars out there at that hour, and none of them had anyone in them. We reviewed the security footage the next morning. She had been in the store for 3 hours and 40 minutes. In that entire time, she never picked up a single item, never stopped at a register, never used her phone. She just walked the same sections of the store over and over. And then, at some point, between 4:15 and 4:30, she simply wasn't there anymore. The footage at the exit doors never showed her leaving. I don't work past 4 a.m. anymore. I talked to my manager and rearranged my shift. I told him I'd explain why later, and never really did, because I'm not sure how to explain it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm overreacting. But I know what she said. She gets off at 6. She knew my schedule. She knew I was alone back there. And whatever she was doing in that store for almost 4 hours, it wasn't shopping. I've thought about it almost every day since. My name is Derek. I've worked the overnight shift at our Burger King for almost 3 years, closing duties mostly 9:00 p.m. to 5:00 a.m. It's quiet work most nights. You get your regulars, your drunk stragglers after the bars close, and a whole lot of dead air in between. I actually like it that way. Less people, less stress. More time to just exist behind the counter and let my brain go numb for 8 hours. This started about 6 weeks ago. It was a slow Tuesday, maybe 1:00 a.m., when a man walked in through the front doors instead of using the drive-thru. That alone wasn't crazy. We get the occasional walk-in late at night, but something about him felt off immediately. He was wearing a button-up shirt and slacks, way too formal for 1:00 a.m., and he had a laminated badge clipped to his shirt pocket. He walked straight up to the counter, didn't even glance at the menu, and told me he was with the county health department doing a surprise overnight inspection. I told him I'd need to call my manager, which is standard procedure for anything like that. He said that wasn't necessary, that overnight inspections are unannounced by design, and that calling ahead would defeat the purpose. He said he just needed access to the kitchen and the back areas, and that it would only take a few minutes. I was nervous, but he had this calm, authoritative way of talking that made arguing with him feel stupid, so I let him in. He walked through the kitchen slowly, running his fingers along surfaces, checking the walk-in cooler, jotting things down on a small notepad. He didn't really ask me anything. He just looked around in this methodical, almost rehearsed way. After about 10 minutes, he thanked me, said everything looked fine, and left, without giving me any paperwork or a copy of anything. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much more of it. I figured I'd mention it to my manager the next day, and I did. She had no idea what I was talking about. She said health inspections never happen overnight, and that nobody from the county had any scheduled visit. She told me if it happened again, I needed to call the police immediately and not let anyone in. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. About a week and a half later, same time, same night of the week, he came back. Different badge this time, or at least it looked different from where I was standing, but same calm voice, same slacks. He said he was following up on some violations from the last visit and needed to do another walkthrough. I told him I couldn't let him in without contacting my manager first, like she'd instructed. He just smiled at that, this small, unbothered smile, like he already knew I'd say that. He said that was fine, he'd wait. Then he sat down in the dining area, ordered nothing, and just sat there. For almost 40 minutes, he sat in that booth, not on his phone, not reading anything, just sitting there facing the counter. I called my manager. She didn't pick up. I called the non-emergency police line, and by the time I got off hold, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. The booth just empty like he'd never been there. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how still he'd been sitting there. Most people fidget, check their phones, look around. He just watched me work like it was the most natural thing in the world. 2 weeks went by with nothing. I almost convinced myself it really had just been some weird guy with a power trip, the kind of person who likes pretending to have authority he doesn't have. I've met people like that before, but then last week, everything changed. I was on a smoke break out back around 2:30 in the morning, and I saw a flyer stapled to the telephone pole near the dumpsters. It was a missing person poster, the kind you see plastered around sometimes, faded and curling at the edges like it had been there a while. I almost didn't look at it twice, but something made me stop. The face on it was him. Same exact face, same hairline, even what looked like the same shirt collar in the photo. The poster said he'd gone missing almost 2 years ago, somewhere 2 towns over. There was a name, a date, a number to call if you had information. No mention of why he disappeared, just that he had. I stood out there in the cold, just staring at that flyer for I don't know how long. My first instinct was that I was wrong, that I was tired and my brain was playing tricks on me. Pattern matching a stranger's face onto a man I barely got a good look at twice. But the more I stared, the more certain I became. It was him. I went back inside and didn't say anything to anyone for the rest of my shift. I just kept glancing at the front doors every few minutes, half expecting him to walk through them again. He didn't, not that night. I called the number on the flyer the next morning. It rang a few times, and then picked up to what sounded like a generic answering service. Not a family member, not police. Just a recorded voice asking me to leave details. I left a message explaining everything. The inspections, the sitting in the booth, all of it. Nobody's called me back yet. I haven't told my manager about the flyer. I don't really know how to bring it up without sounding insane. Hey, I think the fake health inspector who's been showing up might be a missing person. Isn't exactly something people respond well to. But I keep thinking about how calm he was both times. How he didn't seem confused or lost, the way you'd expect someone who'd been missing for 2 years to seem. He seemed like he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly where he was. It's been 4 days since I saw that flyer, and 3 since I last saw him in person. I've started parking closer to the front doors instead of the back lot, and I've stopped taking my smoke breaks alone. I keep telling myself it's probably nothing, that there's some explanation I'm not seeing. But every night around 1 a.m., I find myself watching that front door a little too closely, waiting to see if he walks back in.